Book 3, Chapter 1 of the Lancashire Witches. This recording is in the public domain. Reading by Andy Minter. The Lancashire Witches, a Romance of Pendle Forest, by William Harrison Ainsworth. Book 3, Houghton Tower. Chapter 1. Downham Manor House. On a lovely morning about the middle of July, in the same year as the events previously narrated, Nicholas Assheton, always astir with the lark, issued from his dwelling and sauntered across the smooth lawn in front of it. The green eminence on which he stood was sheltered on the right by a grove of sycamores, forming the boundary of the park, and sloped down to a valley threaded by a small clear stream, whose murmuring, as it danced over its pebbly bed, distinctly reached his ear in the stillness of early day. On the left, partly in the valley and partly on the side of the acclivity on which the hall was situated, nestled the little village whose inhabitants owned Nicholas as lord, and, to judge from their habitations, they had reason to rejoice in their master, for certainly there was a cheerful air about Downham, which the neighbouring hamlets, especially those in Pendle Forest, sadly wanted. On the left of the mansion, and only separated from it by the garden walls, stood the church, a venerable structure, dating back to a period more remote even than Whalley Abbey. From the churchyard a view, almost similar to that enjoyed by the squire, was obtained, though partially interrupted by the thick rounded foliage of a large tree growing beneath it, and many a traveller who came that way lingered within the hallowed precincts to contemplate the prospect. At the foot of the hill was a small stone bridge crossing the stream. Across the road, and scarce 30 paces from the church gate, stood a little alehouse, whose comfortable fireside nook and good liquors were not disdained by the squire. In fact, to his shame be it spoken, he was quite as often to be found there of an evening as at the hall. This had more particularly been the case since the house was tenanted by Richard Baldwin, who, having given up the mill at Rough Lee, and taken to wife Bess Whitaker of Goldshaw Booth, had removed with her to Downham, where he now flourished under the special protection of the squire. Bess had lost none of her old habits of command, and it must be confessed that poor Richard played a very secondary part in the establishment. Nicholas, as may be supposed, was permitted considerable licence by her, but even he had limits, which she took good care he should not exceed. The Downham domains were well cultivated, the line of demarcation between them and the heathy wastes adjoining being clearly traced out, and you had only to follow the course of the brook to see at a glance where the purlieus of the forest ended, and where Nicholas Assheton's property commenced, the one being a dreary moor, with here and there a thicket upon it, but more frequently a dangerous morass covered with sulphur coloured moss, and the other consisting of green meadows, bordered in most instances by magnificent timber. The contrast, however, was not without its charm, and while the sterile wastes set off the fair and fertile fields around them, and enhanced their beauty, they offered a wide uninterrupted expanse, over which the eye could range at will. On the further side of the valley, and immediately opposite the lawn whereupon Nicholas stood, the ground gradually arose until it reached the foot of Pendle Hill, which here, assuming its most majestic aspect, constituted the grand and peculiar feature of the scene. Nowhere could the lordly eminence be seen to the same advantage as from this point, and Nicholas contemplated it with feelings of rapture, which no familiarity could diminish. The sun shone brightly upon its rounded summit, and upon its seamy sides, revealing all its rifts and ridges, adding depth of tint to its dusky soil, laid bare in places by the winter torrents, lending new beauty to its purple heath, and making its grey sod glow as with fire. So exhilarating was the prospect, that Nicholas felt half tempted to cross the valley and scale the hill before breaking his fast, but other feelings checked him, and he turned towards the right. Here, beyond a paddock and some outbuildings, lay the park, small in extent, but beautifully diversified, well stocked with deer, and boasting much noble timber. In the midst was an exquisite knoll, which, beside commanding a fine view of Pendle Hill, Downham, and all the adjacent country, brought within its scope, on the one hand, the ancient castle of Clithero and the heights overlooking Whalley, and on the other, the lovely and extensive vale through which the Ribble wandered. This also was a favourite point of view with the squire, and he had some idea of walking towards it, when he was arrested by a person who came from the house, and who shouted to him, hoarsely but blithely, to stay. The new comer was a man of middle age, with a skin almost as tawny as a gipsy's, a hooked nose, black beetling brows, and eyes set so strangely in his head that they communicated a sinister expression to his countenance. He possessed a burly frame, square and somewhat heavy, though not so much as to impede his activity. In deportment and stature, though not in feature, he resembled the squire himself, and the likeness was heightened by his habiliments being part of Nicholas's old wardrobe, the doublet and hose, and even the green hat and boots, being those in which Nicholas made his first appearance in this history. The person who thus condescended to be fed and clothed at the squire's expense, and who filled a situation something between guest and menial, without receiving the precise attention of the one or the wages of the other, but who made himself so useful to Nicholas that he could not dispense with him, neither perhaps would he have been shaken off, even if it had been desired, was named Lawrence Fogg, an entire stranger to the country, whom Nicholas had picked up at Colne, and whom he had invited to Downham for a few weeks' hunting, and had never been able to get rid of since. Lawrence Fogg liked his quarters immensely, and determined to remain in them, and, as a means to so desirable an end, he studied all the squire's weak points and peculiarities, and these not being very difficult to be understood, he soon mastered them, and mastered the squire into the bargain, but without allowing his success to become manifest. Nicholas was delighted to find one with tastes so congenial to his own, who was so willing to hunt or fish with him, who could train a hawk as well as Phil Royal, the falconer, diet a fighting cock as well as Tom Shaw, the cockmaster, enter a hound better than Charlie Crouch, the old huntsman, shoot with the long bow further than any one except himself, and was willing to toss off a pot with him, or sing a merry stave whenever he felt inclined. Such a companion was invaluable, and Nicholas congratulated himself upon the discovery, especially when he found Lawrence Fogg not unwilling to undertake some delicate commissions for him, which he could not well execute himself, and which he was unwilling should reach Mistress Assheton's ears. These were managed with equal adroitness and caution. About the same time, too, Nicholas, finding money scarce, and not liking to borrow it in person, delegated Fogg, and sent him round to his friends to ask for a loan; but in this instance the mission was attended with very indifferent success, for not one of them would lend him so small a sum as £30, all averring that they stood in need of it quite as much as himself. Though somewhat inconvenienced by their refusal, Nicholas bore the disappointment with his customary equanimity, and made merry with his friend as if nothing had happened. Fogg showed an equally accommodating spirit in all religious observances, and, though much against his inclination, attended morning discourses and lectures with his patron, and even made an attempt at psalm singing, but on one occasion, missing the tune, and coming in with a bacchanalian chorus, he was severely rebuked by the minister, and enjoined to keep silence in future. Such was the friendly relation subsisting between the parties when they met together on the lawn on the morning in question. "Well, Fogg," cried Nicholas, after exchanging salutations with his friend, "what say you to hunting the otter in the Ribble after breakfast? 'Tis a rare day for the sport, and the hounds are in excellent order. There's an old dam and her litter which we must kill, for she has been playing the very devil with the fish for a space of more than 2 mile, and if we let her off for another week we shall have neither salmon, trout, nor umber, as all will have passed down the maws of her voracious brood." "And that would be a pity, in good sooth, squire," replied Fogg, "for there are no fish like those of the Ribble. Nothing I should prefer to the sport you promise. But I thought you had other business for me to day. Another attempt to borrow money, eh?" "Ay, from my cousin, Dick Assheton," rejoined Nicholas. "He'll lend me the £30, I am quite sure. But you had better defer the visit till to morrow, when his father, Sir Richard, will be at Whalley, and when you can have him to yourself. Dick will not say you nay, depend on't. He is too good a fellow for that. A murrain on those close fisted curmudgeons, Roger Nowell, Nicholas Townley, and Tom Whitaker. They ought to